Hello, everyone. Welcome to Osquery office hours. Here we are, late July. Hopefully, people are having nice summers wherever you all are. Um, yeah. Anyhow, shall we get to it? Announcements and highlights. Maybe since the last meeting we cut 540. Don't remember. Um, talk about that maybe down in agenda land. It's probably all the highlights I've got. Don't know if anyone else has anything. Okay. Next section is questions, issues, PRs. General intent here is sort of an open section for community members to bring something up that they're maybe not, don't think merits a full agenda item, or they're just not comfortable.
I see Mo added some things, and I'll ping him to see if he's joining.
Maybe meanwhile, we can jump to some of the other things. So, Osquery 540, I think we can call it stable. I think we probably could have called it stable a few days ago, but and any objections?
I'd say let's do it. I mean, it sounds like it's gotten a little bit of testing at Fleet and a little bit of testing at Collides. That's about all we can expect, I think, before it's declared stable.
Okay, I'll click the buttons to declare it stable later on today then. One thing that someday I think we should do is we should rewrite our code signing stuff so that we don't rebuild everything when we declare something stable. We should just take the builds that are already in GitHub and promote them. But that's a bunch of gnarly Python work, so let's maybe not do that today. But it's kind of just been a thing that I think lurks in the background for me. Okay.
Is the signing is done in GitHub Actions, right?
Yeah, it's over in the Osquery code sign repo.
But the Python script gets the tag and releases from the GitHub API.
Yeah, we could probably. Yeah, I think Stefano or Alessandro wrote that stuff. I think at this point we could even replace some of that with invocations of the GH tool, but if it works, why change it? I see Mo's here. There's probably nothing else to talk about on 540. So maybe we can bounce to Mo's issue.
Great. Yeah, thank you all for the conversation on those. I figured we could maybe just wrap it up in a call rather than, back and forth on the GitHub. There are two there were two sort of things that we were going back and forth on. One was like how and whether, to communicate those like weird M1 Intel things that we're experiencing right now. And then the second was the way that the screen lock table has kind of a somewhat of a unique user context dependent, but not like the other user context dependent tables, user context dependence. So my goal really was to just kind of maybe get to a resolution on how we want to move forward on those, both in the short term and the long term. And maybe starting with the M1 one.
So my main criticism on your PR on the M1 PR is that Osquery tries to be cross-platform, but there are always data differences, and I feel like if we on every table, if we put something in about like this data may be different, it just becomes noise. I'm fairly in favor of putting something like that anywhere in the docs or at the top of the web page that displays specs, or sort of anywhere where it's not, every table has a footnote that says this data might be different on different platforms, because it just looks meaningful to me when we do that. So I'm in favor of like a high level doc, but not every table should carry that disclaimer.
Yeah, is there, I think when you say like platform, the thing that like, are you referring to like Mac versus Windows versus Linux, right? Those icons at the top, because I would expect that to be like, I don't think we need to say that, right? But then like,
no, I think we should. So I think actually we're very inconsistent, and I think that what platform means is another place we're lacking. Like right now we have, 2 years ago, the only platform differences that mattered were OSs. Right? We didn't have architectural differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the last 2 years, we've brought in ARM64 support and Apple M1 support. And with both of those, we have brought in additional platform variations.
Yep.
So Linux ARM64 behaves slightly differently than Linux x86 because of the nature of the platforms. And for all I know, there are places where AMD CPUs differed from Intel's and traditional x86 stuff. We have a bunch of weird memory tables and CPU tables, and I don't know if those have always been consistent. So I think we've sort of increased. So like one, I think our definition of platform is too narrow, and we've just never grappled with like, well, how do we do that? What does this mean? If you're running inside Osquery, do you have a good way to say what platform are you running on? We don't. We have a platform bit mask, which is authoritative for the operating system, but not the CPU architecture. So our whole concept of platform actually feels very lacking. And then on top of that, I think Osquery tries very hard to normalize data, right? In a lot of our PRs, when we talk about cross-table specs, we talk about, well, what's a meaningful set of columns that works across Windows and Mac and Linux, and how do we normalize this? And should this be like one column that has really different meanings, or like a simple Boolean column and then some extended schema? So that's like an ongoing thing. But we sometimes get it wrong. and then sometimes we fix it when we get it wrong. We've certainly said, we just recently merged a PR where like the model name on M1 machines was wrong because we were fetching the wrong key, right? So we just fixed that. So like there are all these places where data is just different, and sometimes we can normalize it and sometimes we can't. And I don't think we can successfully track it for every column that we have. So I think the best we can do is just warn people that across the large space of machines and operating systems, data may not be consistent, and they have to just test it.
I would also add that for like between the tables you have in that PR you have added documentation for there are tables. I mean, we have defects in the sense that those tables should return something or should work, but they currently don't. So maybe, yeah, we don't want to document that things are different in the sense that they will stay different. Some of those things, actually, most of those things, we want to fix them. We want to provide some alternatives. But yeah, everything else Seth said, obviously, even if we provide something, in many cases, we have differences with the data itself or the amount of columns we can provide. So, yeah.
Should we, while we're, or until we're able to fix the underlying issues, can we document in a way that's easily accessible to users or prospective users? Because it seems like otherwise that leaves people to have to actually try it, find the data is wrong, then find if there's an issue on GitHub or something like that.
I kind of want that to happen, though. I might be wrong.
Why not make an issue on GitHub and then link that or reference that issue number from the schema where we could say what we know is not working?
I mean, part of that is there is already sort of a general issue where it lists all the tables that are using for SN BIOS, for instance, under M1, and which will not work because there's no SN BIOS used under M1. And yeah, it also links a couple of other tables that do not use SMBIOS but still are affected by some issues. So there is some documentation, but it is in form of issues. Yeah.
I mean, let me ask you, Zach, what's driving this? Like, do you have a bunch of users that are like trying to use a table or trying to write queries, and they're like, "Oh, what's authoritative?" Or is this like internal fleet staff, or like kind of where's it? What's the driver?
We're undertaking testing of just all the tables because we found in various calls and stuff like that, it just kind of breaks or things return unexpected things, and so one of those things returning unexpected things that we found was this M1 versus Intel issue, where it's like, why is this a 1? And then that's 100 over here or something like that.
Sounds like the battery health table.
Yes, that exactly. Yeah, what I'm referencing there. And so it's and then like, especially as like a new person coming in, trying to troubleshoot those, like nothing kind of it wasn't clear to me, right, what was happening. And it took me actually a little bit of time to realize, to like compare the two computers. So that's sort of what drove a little bit of the, like, it'd be great if this was known. But I mean, I totally see, like your point around, like, there's this broader concept of a platform, and how are we going to communicate this,
So
this kind of thing? Yeah.
I feel very of two minds, right? Like, if you take the battery table, it certainly is known to me that the battery table is different and slightly broken on M1 machines, and possibly broken on the other ones too. Apple's very inconsistent in how they report this data, is a thing we've noticed at Collide. But I don't, like, other than saying that every few months, how would you know without testing it, right? It's just sort of lore, and lore isn't great. But how do we encode that, hey, there's some weirdness here in a way that indicates this might be a bug, there's work here to be done? It's like, I don't really want to document every bug in like underlying data in the tables. That just feels very hard to manage. There's a lot. So I feel this tension between how do we handle that. And I don't know, you just said you went through all of this, so maybe you're in a good position to chew on that. But I'm just broadly against putting boilerplate language on every table.
Certainly
Yeah,
not on every table. I mean, I think the idea is, now that we've identified things, like, we're working to fix some things, other things aren't going to be able to be fixed immediately or perhaps ever. And why make folks duplicate the work, especially folks who are like, don't necessarily have the level of engagement with Osquery that some of us or all of us on this call do.
Maybe here's a question. I don't know the answer, but I'll toss it out. So we have a secure boot table, which Alessandro is currently porting to the Mac platform, though I'm not sure that it will work on modern Mac platforms. So what should happen when someone queries it? Should we return no results and emit a warning? Return no results and emit something in verbose? Document this in the table schema? Like, I'm sort of using the secure boot a little bit as an example of maybe the same problem. So how, like, is this an appropriate place? And does the status or warning logs make a better place for sort of like a, hey, we know there's some dragons here, like, I got nothing?
I mean, I think that we should probably, if there's no possible way to return good data, we should return an error so that the query entirely errors out, because, like, it's never easy for users to understand why their queries didn't work if they're only getting logs and they're not getting actual errors
There's
returned.
a counterpoint on that, which is that when tables throw errors, it becomes much harder to build cross-platform things, whereas if they return nulls, you can.
Yeah, that's
like, there's no good
that's
answer.
true. Yeah.
But sorry, go on, Mo.
let me see if I can share my screen for a second. I just kind of took a little bit of inspiration from other sort of like, this one's on, are you able to see this? This is the Vue.js documentation.
Yes.
Yeah. Like I think a lot of documentation just like inevitably ends up with things like, you know, if you do this and here's a weird thing, right? Or here's like sales, like, you know, if you do this, then, you know, little things like that happen. And it seems like something like that seems appropriate for this M1 thing. Like maybe Seth, to your point around like the boilerplate, actually, in fact, these M1 tables, they're broken. Some of them are just pure broken. Other ones are going to return something different, but every time they return something different, they're going to return something different in a different way, right? So it's less about the boilerplate, right, and more about like, you know, these notes. And so I was just poking around these other documentation and kind of saw that like I think a lot of them end up in this kind of in these like little bullet lands where there's caveats, you know, documented, right?
You know, I actually kind of like that notes thing. I feel like we need to change both the specs and the website to display that well. Like, I certainly like that more than I like a parenthetical, this is different on an M1, close parentheses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should definitely specify as best as we can. And Seth, to your point before, like it does seem like the hardest problem is figuring out exactly how the behavior should be so that people can best, you know, make their queries work cross-platform or whatever. But it's a lot easier to just write human language, and if people choose to look at the documentation, then that language is there. And it's also allows it to be specified more in a way that's more accessible to the user, I think.
Perhaps. My other worry is generally that documentation goes out of date. So keeping those in sync is hard. Something like tables that emit warnings are much easier to keep in sync because the warning is right in the code.
Yeah. But I mean, the documentation is out of sync today because it represents as if these things are working on M1 or something.
I like that. I like those bulleted point notes. I think they give us better space to write about the problems. You know, to be like on Windows, this, you know, there's some extra columns on Windows, right? Like that feels like a good notesy bullet point kind of thing to me. So I feel like there's some good space there. I imagine it's easy to add that to the specs. I have no idea how easy it is to update the website display to do anything clever about it.
I bet it wouldn't be hard to update the website to at least just like render it as some text below the table description.
So I was thinking like just like a bullet, you know, an unordered list below the description.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Stefano.
No, no
I
problem.
thought it was Charles. I can kind of take that back then, to kind of take that approach rather than the boilerplate approach on this. Then it's fine. But glad to be able to help with this with the documentation and site. So.
Yeah, I think part of what I'm coming from is I don't like boilerplate that just becomes noise, but I sort of agree with you that like if we want to really be good on the table docs, then like you kind of need space to really write, probably in a bulleted list. So I feel like we need a bulleted list, and then we can write stuff in it.
Yeah. Maybe on this topic of updating the website, we can go to number 3 for a second, which is this. I think so. This issue here, you know, previously we had these icons that existed, and there was a key in particular, this required one, that was something that I also ran into where it just things quite mysteriously failed. And it said constraint and it wasn't clear what the constraint was. And so even just having an icon and a key like this would have been super helpful. And I wanted to see, I don't know the full history behind this. It seems like there was something around like we ran out of time on addressing this or something like that. But I would love to be able to try to push, getting these icons back into the documentation. So, and do we have these assets and things like that?
I could find no history of the old website code. It probably predates my involvement with Osquery.
I think
Zach might know more.
Fritz maybe have assets, or maybe at least he screenshots. So
those were screenshots of the old website, which I could find in the Wayback Machine too. So I don't know. I could pressure Fritz for assets, but like ultimately these are like 6 SVGs, so I don't know how valuable the particular icons are.
Yeah, I mean, we can probably supply our own. It's probably not going to be that, or worst case, use like the star character, right? It's, so maybe the assets is the wrong question, but more, is like, do we? I would like to try to drive, bringing these icons back into the docs and any.
I'll head this off slightly.
Okay. Yep.
I do not believe the Osquery project has anyone who is knowledgeable in the technologies used in our website. I kind of pretend and like make simple things go, but like I don't know JavaScript or React or any of the languages. So
Yeah,
when
and
you say
I
drive it and make it go, I'm like, okay, PRs are welcome, but like there's no one. I have access to no humans that I could pressure to do this work.
I think we probably have folks on our team who could do it. If I remember the websites, it's like a React single page application.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird, but
I would
we have
happily,
React people on our team.
I would happily review and accept reasonable React PRs. I would also happily engender discussion about whether there's a simpler website technology we could replace this whole thing with. Y'all maybe have the best people for this. I'm kind of happy to go wherever y'all want to go with this.
Great.
So I don't
But
know
in terms of, it sounds like there's agreement to pursue these kind of changes. It's a question of resources. Is that
I do
right?
not think I think there is, okay, so there's me and then there's the Osquery project and they're mostly overlapping, right? And then there's like y'all and the Osquery project. And yeah. I am in favor of things that I think of as improvements to the website. I do not have resources to facilitate that. I will happily review PRs or discussion. There are some things that you may propose that I do not think of as advantageous on the website. The first cut at the M1 differences PR, for example, right? I didn't agree with that and pushed back. But the current conversation, I think we're all sort of in agreement about what an improvement would look like. And then it's just, I don't know, PR's welcome. Does that make sense, Zach?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, depending on how controversial we think anything is, like usually we've just done PRs to make the changes.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was any. I wanted to raise that because I didn't know if there was any previous work and any other landmines around it. So, but yeah, good to know.
I think what you see is what you get. In
Okay.
the distant past, there was another website somewhere early in Collide's history. I think Collide sponsored the creation of this website through a third party.
Yep.
But it was before my time. Zach might remember more than I do. So as
Yeah,
I know,
it
like,
was
what
done
you
by
see is what you get.
It was done by contractors. It was done by the folks from the NAR company, I think.
Probably.
And that's about all I know.
Yeah. Well, okay.
My feeling is I'd wish it was not, but the level of effort to redo it in something that's more accessible to these folks who are here is probably a lot higher than the level of effort to just make some minor changes that we want. Now, if someone wants to fully redesign the Osquery website at some point, then it might be worth looking at new technologies. That's my feeling.
I was
Yeah.
going on to say almost that since it's basically a static website, we could really use something based on, I don't know, Hugo, Markdown, and things like that. So there is, like, it doesn't really need JavaScript, I think, or
I think
so there's not really dynamic in there. I think it's
probably-
only presenting data in a nice way. So
I think probably building
Totally.
the table display is going to be a surprisingly large amount of work.
Yeah, that would be the biggest concern to me. Yeah, and just writing
Yeah.
all, fixing and rewriting all the styles, or making sure that whatever static site generator like generates HTML that matches the existing styles or something, just seems like that's going to be where a ton of work goes in. The website is not crazy, I don't think. Like, I've made changes to it. It's just React. Like, I don't agree with the concept of like that a single, that a static website should be built with React, but once you get past that, it's not actually that hard to change the HTML that's rendered by those components, because it's just standard React.
Yeah, I think I'll probably, we'll, as you can, we're also doing the Windows tables next and the Linux tables next, and so there'll probably be more changes proposed and things that we uncover. I think probably for now, these website changes, I'll try to limit them to just working within the box that we have, because I don't think the Fleet team yet has good understanding of the site, but maybe some of these deeper questions we will address once we just even understand it a little better. So
I suspect you could set up something to take the specs and stick a bullet list on the box pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so as well. I'm pretty confident that we could make the change without much trouble.
Okay, cool. Well, I look forward to that PR.
Right. And then the second one there, the screen.
Yeah, that one's weird.
It sounds like that's a bullet point one.
That might be or even just in the straight description. Because that's a very weird table using a very weird API. Possibly, I would just expand the table description to better capture what's happening.
So have you noticed differences in the screen lock table between M1 and Intel as well?
I haven't gone looking,
Okay.
but we haven't noticed a problem.
Okay.
Haven't tested on M2 yet. Are you seeing anything?
Yeah, there's some little discrepancy, weirdness between Intel and M1. I haven't captured it yet, and I've only seen it like on a couple of machines that I have access to. So I don't know if it's a broader thing or not. But yeah, like you said, it's a very weird table, and even using it is even. Yeah, you told me about the launch D run as thing, and even that is not working as well as it should in my limited testing. But
I can tell you it works, and I baked support into Launcher to do exactly what it needed. But it's kind of a weird one. Just to read, probably the best description of what that table needs is the PR that launched it. But as we understand it, as we at Collide understand it, the data for that is stored in an encrypted mobile key bag, I think, which is like something that macOS
iOS stuff that
came into
I
macOS.
noticed that.
And that's where that data lives. And you can only get it if the user has logged in recently, so that the key bag is like decrypted in RAM and you are running in the user context. So it's real weird.
I made it. I tried to summarize all the stuff and updated that description as you were suggesting, Steph. So please take a look whenever
Okay,
you guys.
I'll try and look at it.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
It's everything from me.
Cool. Well, it's definitely look forward to website improvements. Next agenda item, I think, is from Charvel about nulls in data and indexed columns.
Yeah, so I think this kind of came out from the password policy table that you filed the issue for. So when you just run select star from password policy, all it does, like, gets the global policies and then iterates over all the users and then kind of gets the password policies for all the users. And we have a UID column to kind of say, like, hey, this password policy belongs to this UID. And if it's a global policy, the UID column is essentially null. And the issue here is, like, if you do a -- null character, like A or Z or whatever, it shows as null, but then you can't select on it. Or, like, if you give a constraint where UID equals, let's say, 501 or 502, then it works as expected. But if you do, like, UID is null, it doesn't work, or then UID not equals to empty string, it doesn't work. And I think this relates to an issue that Stefano has created a while back, that we don't pass empty constraints to the table generation. So I don't know what the answer is. The quick fix is put, like, -1 in UID for global policies, but yeah, I don't know what the correct answer here is.
Why does passing empty constraints matter?
I think the way the X filter works, I don't know. Like,
yeah, I mean, an empty value is still a possible value between the values, the rows of a table, or a column can have an empty value. The problem we have, so this is where I recall differs from the problem here, is that yes, we are not passing the constraint, empty constraint, to the table logic, but SQLite always filters on top of the results that the table returns. So in theory, the filtering should still work, in the sense that you shouldn't see rows that have the UID set to another thing. So basically, rows that do not have the UID set to empty.
Well, but
so it's more of an optimization problem, where if you are passing the constraint as empty and that gets not passed to the underlying table logic, it means that the table logic is forced to return all the results, and then SQLite has to filter, maybe in a non-performance manner, but it shouldn't affect the final result.
In that case, that is not the issue at hand.
The other is, like, so that related to the text affinity, right? Here we have the BigInt affinity, and then we are passing UID constraint as a string when we do equals empty string or not equals whatever.
So yeah, that's an interesting one. I haven't at the time I didn't look at the various conversions that happened, but I would think that if you want to match for missing UID, you're best doing that matching with null, not with empty
Same
string.
problem though. Not null doesn't, the table doesn't return data if you do not null.
Sorry, come again?
So the particular weirdness that I found was, right, so if I search for where UID is null, I get no data back.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. And actually that matches matches what I recall now. Yeah, that was the other weird thing I recall. I noticed that somehow we don't return null anymore. I mean, I recall there was a point where if we didn't set a column in the table logic, then it would return that value as null. But I recall that then we changed it to always return something. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the reason, but anyway, I wasn't able to find any null anymore in tables. Yeah, so it's weird, and I'm not sure how it is working right now. I still had to do some investigation. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, are we even setting the values to null on the column? Like, can we set them to null explicitly?
I tried it. I couldn't get that to work. We have a define SQLite null as like an empty string, but it's not being used anywhere. It's just a comment in table header file.
Yeah, we cannot do that from the table logic, but yeah, there is the generic logic that do all the conversion that either sets. Yeah, you can get empty. Now, do we still, Alessandro saying, yeah, that we actually get empty or null when we use internal APIs like select all from? But yeah.
So I remember that we changed some table implementations there to prevent them from returning missing columns. And that is because other table implementations were using select all from. And so we were trying to at least prevent a bad map access exception through this change, which is maybe not ideal. I mean, null values will be better.
How hard would it be to walk that change back?
It is per table. So previously, if a column did not apply, but was in the schema, then we would set an empty string.
But we wouldn't set a null. I feel like we just have this huge chaos around is missing data, empty string, null, or -1. And, you know, Mo, you want inconsistencies that cause endless problems. This is one for me.
Alessandro, sorry, one thing is you say that these changes are per table in the sense that they are in the table logic, table implementation. They are not in that generic library code we have that does the conversions.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Yeah, but what I was saying is that actually, even if I use a table and force, like I'm not passing back a column for it, I'm not getting nulls. I cannot query for nulls, and that column should be null because I haven't passed it. So we have something that always set it somehow, even if it's an integer, it ends up at the other side as an empty string, although then you have several issues querying it. Yeah, and it's not null. So yeah, I'm not sure what happened. We lost actually the nulls, I think. And
of
yeah,
the possible implementations of a table logic, as Intracode, we had two different ways to return data when implementing a table. Was that happening on both implementations?
You mean, so we have this string map way, and the other way is to directly access the structure. So you have the data, the typed data.
Yeah.
The other way you cannot. That's the other thing. I recall we talked that we wanted to get away from using this generic map with strings to pass data from the table implementation back to SQLite and back to the presentation layer, let's say. And we wanted to use typed data, but how it is done right now is that you cannot have missing data. So you have to provide some magic value that means either there is nothing or there has been an error. So if you have an integer, you cannot not set it to something. We don't use boost optionals for each field, and we cannot leave it as missing. So that I know that there are some tables in the macOS side that do use it. Maybe the processes table actually use that form, and yeah, it cannot leave one of the column empty or missing actually.
This all sounds very confusing.
So yeah,
Is there a good way forward?
I think, well, so first of all, I think we should define what our expectation is, and then we can work towards it. Definitely. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy because there are like 3-4 different ways right now how things are represented internally, but yeah, having a clear goal helps.
So I feel like there's probably multiple goals, right? If we think about the password policy table specifically, right, that's returning data for both global users, both global policies and per UID policies. And given this specific use case, you could imagine either a global Boolean column or a Sentinel value, or nice to see you, Alessandro, or a Sentinel value, or who knows what. But I feel like in the general case, we definitely should have better null support. And I feel like the inconsistencies around nulls and around typed data in general have kind of just been a weird quarter case for a long time.
Yeah, so for me, what Alessandro mentioned about the internal APIs being, well, causing crashes, that's like an implementation issue of the API itself. It should provide a way to check if, like, and we should check if the column is missing or not, and just not it, or try to dereference something that is null. So, I mean, we can definitely do that. As the goal, I mean, so we all agree, for instance, that in the presentation layer, or let's say when you are launching a query, you want to see nulls. I mean, you want to be able to query for nulls and see if columns are nulls. We don't want to magically make them disappear and make them be something. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I think the most gnarly part is specifically around the handle of constraints and how we pass to the table logic. Because when we accept nulls as constraints to pass to the table logic, yeah, we have to construct also something there when we retrieve the constraints in the table so that the table knows that it is a null, but it doesn't crash and things like that. So this is currently missing. And we are actually filtering them away, as same thing as the empty string.
I don't know if I imagine the changes you're describing sound like they would require updating a large amount of tables. Because we're talking about changing constraints, we're maybe talking about changing the results from being a simple map to being some other object structure. And
yeah.
And if I were doing this in another language that I knew better, I would create some other table implementation that supported these things and then slowly port tables to it one at a time. is that, can we do something like that?
Yeah, I think that's what the experimental branch and Facebook was doing. There is a start about that on that, but I'm not sure. Like, I have to look into it. But I think they were not handling the fact that missing columns that has to be transformed null. Like every column or field had to be passed, and so it could not have the special value of missing. And so we already have that case, so we already kind of support it. As I was saying, on macOS, we have the processes table. It's not passing back a hash map of strings. It's actually passing back directly the structure, which is typed. So every column has the type depending on like integer, int, if it's a string, it's a string, etc. But yeah, that kind of conversion really is more. It is more an optimization, let's say. In a sense, we still would need either way to change many tables. Like if we add support for nulls, I would revert the fact that we are just we are always or almost always setting the columns to empty first before setting in it something that has to go away.
Yeah,
Table
because
logic.
empty is distinct. Like empty has meaning.
Exactly. So that will be a change. Otherwise, I feel like most of the change right now or the investigation are around the filtering and internals. And constructing better APIs to avoid crashing or anything.
Yeah. It seems like it would be valuable, but also large. And I don't know if there's, in the words of our former coworker Mike Arpaia, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on this. Obviously, it hasn't been in the last 6 years. So I don't know if that changes at some point.
I mean, in a sense, some of all of these differences are a bit of us slow down every time one of the developers want to do something. So I think also that, I'm not saying they're necessarily always a big issue, but obviously if we can get the experience smoother.
Yeah. Okay, and for the password table specifically, I don't know, do people have feelings? Like, what makes sense? Should we make a sentinel value? Should we make another column? I don't know, I hate sentinel values, but maybe they're the least evil.
I mean, -1 is the usual sentinel value, but
Or having another column, whether it's a global policy or not. Yeah, I'll make those changes and kind of play around with them and do that.
Yeah, sentinel value might be the simplest.
That is true. -1 is the simplest it works. I have a branch for that, but it's not a clean. It is empty. But I think it might be the simplest thing here.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's what we get. Okay. Any other questions, discussion? If not, perhaps we get 10 minutes back.
Well, the community is going to be stoked that we cut the 540 stable. I see there are a few people
asking about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone.
We'll push buttons today. So thank you,
Thanks,
everyone,
Seb.
for your time
thank
and
you.
contributions and efforts. And talk to you all in 2 weeks or so.
All right. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.